The visual evidence captured in this viral broadcast represents more than a mere lapse in judgment or a momentary stumble under the spotlight of a national debate. It serves as a definitive exposure of the ideological fractures that have long simmered beneath the surface of the modern American political landscape. When Vice President JD Vance confronted Representative Ilhan Omar with the cold reality of her own recorded words, the atmosphere shifted from standard political theater to a moment of profound national reckoning. This was not an ambush orchestrated for television ratings, but rather a necessary exercise in constitutional transparency and public accountability. The leaked recordings presented during the segment provided a chilling window into a worldview that appears to prioritize ancestral allegiances over the foundational interests of the United States. For too long, the political establishment has tiptoed around the sensitive issue of dual loyalty among representatives who swear an oath to the American people. JD Vance correctly identified that the essence of public service in the United States requires an undivided heart and a singular focus on the security of our own borders and citizens. By juxtaposing Omar's previous voting record with her private rhetoric regarding Somali interests, the Vice President highlighted a pattern of behavior that many Americans find deeply unsettling. The debate was no longer about policy nuances or budgetary allocations, but about the very definition of what it means to be an American legislator. It asked the fundamental question of whether a representative can truly serve two masters when their interests inevitably and sharply diverge. The drama reached its zenith when a Somali-American voter, standing firmly in his identity as a citizen of this republic, challenged the Congresswoman to affirm her primary allegiance. This was a masterstroke of moral clarity that stripped away the usual defenses of identity politics and forced a confrontation with the truth. When a member of one's own community demands a public declaration of loyalty to the flag that provides them protection and opportunity, silence is an admission. The voters' presence underscored a growing movement among immigrant communities who embrace the American dream and reject the balkanization of our national identity. They understand that the strength of this nation lies in the melting pot, not in a collection of disconnected diasporas working for foreign ends. Representative Omar's inability to provide a direct and unequivocal affirmation of her primary commitment to the United States was the silence heard around the world. It was a moment where the weight of her previous rhetoric finally collided with the gravity of her constitutional responsibilities. Instead of seizing the opportunity to bridge the gap and reassure the electorate, her decision to abruptly exit the stage signaled a total collapse of political credibility. A leader who cannot stand their ground when questioned on the most basic tenets of patriotism is a leader who has forfeited the right to govern. This exit was not just a physical departure from a television set, but a symbolic withdrawal from the American social contract. The subsequent fallout, including her primary defeat, reflects a healthy democratic immune system reacting to an element that no longer aligns with the body politic. Voters in her own district, many of whom share her background, demonstrated that they value the integrity of the office above the comfort of shared heritage. They recognized that a representative must be an advocate for the American taxpayer first, last, and always, without the interference of overseas political agendas. This event has set a new precedent for how we vet those who seek to influence our laws and lead our military. It proves that the American people are tired of excuses and are now demanding a standard of loyalty that is as clear as the stars on our flag. This confrontation serves as a warning to any politician who views their seat in Congress as a platform for global activism at the expense of local stability. The Republican perspective has always maintained that the United States is a sovereign entity with its own distinct culture and set of priorities that must be protected. When JD Vance leveraged that leaked audio, he was acting as a proxy for millions of citizens who feel their voices are being drowned out by globalist interests. The reaction from the audience and the subsequent national discourse suggest that we are entering an era of renewed national pride. No longer will the mantle of diversity be allowed to serve as a shield against legitimate inquiries into a candidate's true motivations. The collapse of Omar's political career in the wake of this debate is a testament to the power of truth when it is delivered with courage and precision. It illustrates that the American electorate possesses a keen intuition for detecting when a leader's heart is elsewhere. By refusing to answer a simple question about her loyalty, she confirmed the fears of her critics and alienated her most important supporters. The political landscape of 2026 is one where transparency is not optional and where the bonds of national unity are being reinforced through trial by fire. This turning point marks the end of an era of ambiguity and the beginning of a more rigorous standard for public service. As we analyze the fallout of this historic night, we must realize that the stakes of our political debates are reaching an inflection point. The debate in question was a microcosm of a much larger struggle for the soul of the American government and its role in the world. It reminded us that the oath of office is not a mere formality but a sacred vow that demands the utmost transparency and devotion. The failure of one individual to meet this standard has ignited a flame of patriotism that will likely define the upcoming election cycle. We are seeing a return to the foundational principle that to lead America, one must truly and unreservedly love America. The scrutiny of Representative Omar's legislative record reveals a consistent preference for internationalist interventionism that often appears decoupled from the immediate security needs of the American heartland. When Vice President JD Vance pivoted the discussion toward her specific advocacy regarding the Horn of Africa, he was highlighting a tension that has troubled constitutional originalists for years. It is one thing to represent a diverse constituency, but quite another to leverage a federal seat to influence the maritime boundaries and sovereign disputes of a foreign power. The leaked audio served as a catalyst for a broader investigation into how personal ethnic grievances can bleed into the sacred halls of American policymaking. This intersection of private passion and public duty is where the conservative critique finds its most potent and undeniable moral ground. Voters across the country are increasingly wary of a political class that speaks the language of global equity while ignoring the domestic erosion of national sovereignty. The Vice President's insistence on reviewing Omar's past statements about Somali territorial integrity was not an act of xenophobia but a rigorous demand for clarity on her primary mission. If a lawmaker views the American military or diplomatic apparatus primarily as a tool for the advancement of their ancestral homeland, the integrity of the entire system is compromised. This concern is rooted in the Federalist tradition, which warns against the mischiefs of faction and the danger of foreign influence within our own councils. The spectacle of the 2026 debate merely brought these long-standing academic concerns into the living rooms of every American household. The specific details of the leaked recordings pointed to a strategic alignment that went far beyond mere cultural pride or philanthropic interest in a developing nation. In these moments of private candor, the rhetoric shifted toward a Somalia First framework that stood in direct opposition to the America First mandate of the current administration. JD Vance skillfully dismantled the defense that these comments were mistranslated by pointing to a legislative pattern that favored Somali interests in regional conflicts involving Ethiopia and Kenya. This pattern suggests that the representative's worldview is viewed through a lens of ethnic solidarity rather than the objective strategic interests of the United States. For a conservative audience, this is the ultimate red line that no elected official should be permitted to cross without consequence. The inclusion of the Somali-American challenger on the stage was a vital component in exposing the fallacy that criticizing Omar is an attack on her community. This individual represented the silent majority of immigrants who have come to these shores to leave old-world conflicts behind and embrace a new, unified national identity. By asking her to choose between the interests of Mogadishu and Washington, he gave voice to the millions of naturalized citizens who take their oath of citizenship seriously. His presence reminded the nation that true diversity is found in shared values and common loyalty, not in the importation of foreign disputes. The contrast between his steadfast patriotism and Omar's subsequent hesitation created a visual and moral clarity that was impossible for the media to spin. The legislative history in question includes numerous instances where the Congresswoman's votes on foreign aid and military authorization seemed to mirror the specific desires of the Somali federal government. While her supporters characterized this as progressive diplomacy, the vice president framed it as a dangerous blurring of the lines between American representation and foreign lobbying. Conservative policy experts have long argued that our foreign policy must be transactional and based solely on what benefits the American worker and the security of our republic. Any deviation from this standard, especially one that favors a region with complex internal strife and historical instability, invites unnecessary risk to our national standing. This debate forced a public reckoning with the reality that some leaders may be using their platform to pursue a shadow foreign policy. The silence that followed the direct question of loyalty was a deafening confirmation of the suspicions held by those who believe the Squad is fundamentally disconnected from the American spirit. JD Vance did not need to shout. He simply allowed the vacuum created by her lack of an answer to fill the room with an undeniable truth. This was a moment of political entropy, where the energy of a radical movement dissipated in the face of a basic, fundamental requirement of public office. The American people saw a representative who was willing to speak for hours on international grievances, but was unable to utter a few simple words of devotion to the United States. This failure of rhetoric was a failure of leadership that resonated far beyond the confines of the television studio. Furthermore, the implications of this event touch upon the very nature of the social contract in a modern, multicultural democracy. We are a nation of laws and a nation of immigrants, but we are also a nation that requires a cohesive sense of purpose to survive the challenges of the 21st century. When a high-ranking official appears to hold a conditional or secondary allegiance to the flag, it weakens the trust that binds our diverse society together. The conservative movement's focus on this issue is an attempt to preserve the unum within the e pluribus unum that has made America exceptional. Without a shared and primary loyalty to our own nation, the United States risks becoming nothing more than a collection of competing interest groups with no common destiny. The political collapse that followed the debate was a swift and decisive judgment from an electorate that had grown tired of being lectured on their supposed shortcomings by those who would not commit to them. Her primary defeat was not just a loss for a single politician, but a rejection of a specific brand of identity politics that prioritizes global grievance over local results. It signaled a shift toward a more muscular and unapologetic form of Americanism that demands its leaders be as invested in the country as the people they represent. The 2026 election cycle will be remembered as the moment when the American public reasserted its right to demand total and unswerving loyalty from its public servants. This was not a defeat for diversity, but a victory for the integrity of the American citizen and the sanctity of the vote. The seismic shift in the political landscape of Minnesota's 5th District cannot be understood merely as a localized electoral defeat, but as a broad rejection of radicalism. For years, the metropolitan area of Minneapolis served as a laboratory for the progressive left's experiment in unrestrained multiculturalism and ideological balkanization. Vice President JD Vance's intervention in this district acted as a catalyst for a long overdue chemical reaction among a weary and disillusioned middle class. The traditional Democratic stronghold, once thought to be impenetrable, proved to be remarkably fragile once the core issue of national loyalty was brought to the forefront. This was not a victory achieved through partisan maneuvering, but through the reawakening of a dormant American identity within the heart of an urban enclave. The fall of Ilhan Omar's political machine represents the end of an era where identity politics could be used as an absolute shield against personal accountability. Throughout her tenure, Any criticism of her policy positions or foreign entanglements was immediately branded by the corporate media as a form of systemic prejudice. However, the 2026 debate stripped away this protective layer by presenting a challenger who shared her heritage but rejected her radical, anti-nationalist worldview. This internal challenge within the Somali-American community demonstrated that the immigrant experience is not a monolith that can be owned by the radical left. It showed that when given a choice between perpetual grievance and the stability of the American social contract, many choose the latter. JD Vance's rhetoric during this period emphasized a concept he calls social solidarity, which posits that a nation cannot survive without a shared cultural and civic foundation. He argued that the influx of foreign ethnic grievances into the American legislative process acts as a solvent, slowly dissolving the ties that bind us as a people. By focusing on Omar's specific advocacy for Mogadishu over the needs of her struggling constituents in Minneapolis, he exposed a profound misalignment of priorities. This message resonated with voters who have seen their neighborhoods transformed and their local issues ignored in favor of global activist agendas. The vice president successfully framed the election as a choice between a cohesive national future and a fractured, tribalized past. The media's attempt to frame the congresswoman's abrupt exit from the stage as a protest against hostile rhetoric fell flat within public that demands resilience from its leaders. In the high-stakes arena of national politics, the ability to withstand scrutiny and defend one's record is the bare minimum requirement for holding a seat of power. Her flight was interpreted by the silent majority as a moment of profound weakness and a tactical admission of the very charges she sought to avoid. It highlighted a recurring theme in the conservative critique of the modern left, a tendency to retreat into victimhood when confronted with the logical consequences of their own public statements. This visual of an empty podium became the most powerful advertisement for the necessity of a new, more robust style of American leadership. Minneapolis, a city that has been at the epicenter of national social unrest, served as the perfect backdrop for this ideological realignment. The residents of the 5th District had lived through the chaos of two of the most turbulent years in recent urban history and were looking for a sense of order. When Vance spoke of America first, he was not just talking about trade deals or military alliances. He was talking about the safety and prosperity of the local street corner. He connected the abstract concept of national loyalty to the tangible reality of community safety, arguing that a representative who is preoccupied with overseas borders cannot be trusted to secure our own. This practical application of conservative principles was what finally broke the back of the radical coalition that had sustained Omar's career. The role of the Somali-American voter who stood with Vance cannot be overstated in its significance for the future of the Republican Party. This individual shattered the narrative that the GOP is a party of exclusion, proving instead that it is a party of integration for those who value the American Republic. His demand for a clear declaration of loyalty from his representative was an act of civic courage that empowered others to speak out. It signaled a growing trend among second-generation immigrants who are increasingly skeptical of the left's focus on historical trauma and institutional critique. They are a demographic that values entrepreneurship, family stability, and national security, all of which are core tenets of the modern conservative movement. As the dust settled on the primary election, it became clear that the Democratic Party had suffered a massive strategic defeat by allowing its radical wing to define its identity. The Squad and their allies had fundamentally misread the American public's tolerance for dual loyalty rhetoric and the deconstruction of national traditions. By contrast, JD Vance and the Trump administration have successfully built a big tent that prioritizes common identity over ethnic or racial division. This approach does not ask immigrants to forget their heritage, but requires them to place their primary commitment to the nation that has given them a home. The success of this message in a district as diverse as Minneapolis suggests that the era of identity-based electoral dominance is coming to a close. The collapse of the Omar campaign also serves as a warning to the administrative state and the intelligence community regarding the vetting of public officials. The ease with which foreign interests can be laundered through the rhetoric of human rights and global justice has become a major national security concern. Conservative lawmakers are now calling for more rigorous transparency requirements for members of Congress who maintain active ties to foreign governments or political movements. This is not about restricting free speech, but about ensuring that the people's representatives are truly and only representing the people. The 2026 debate was the opening salvo in a much larger movement to de-link American domestic politics from foreign ideological influence. Finally, we must look at the psychological impact this event had on the American psyche during a time of deep division and uncertainty. For many, seeing a powerful and controversial figure held to account on a national stage provided a sense of catharsis and a glimmer of hope for the future. It proved that the truth still has the power to disrupt even the most carefully crafted political narratives, and that silence can be a potent form of testimony. The image of the vice president standing firm while his opponent retreated remains a defining moment of the decade, symbolizing the reassertion of traditional American values. It marked the beginning of a period where the question, "Where does your loyalty lie?" is no longer seen as an insult but as a necessary prerequisite for leadership. The legacy of this confrontation will be felt for generations as we continue to navigate the complexities of being a diverse nation in a globalized world. It has forced a conversation that was long overdue and established a new standard for what we expect from those who represent us in the highest offices of the land. The people of Minnesota have led the way by demonstrating that no politician is too big to fail when they forget who they were elected to serve. As the nation moves forward, the lessons of 2026 will serve as a roadmap for rebuilding a unified, confident, and unapologetically American society. The era of ambiguity is over, and a new morning of national clarity has finally begun to dawn across the Republic. The geopolitical ripples of the 2026 debate extend far beyond the borders of Minnesota, casting a long shadow over the strategic stability of the Horn of Africa. For decades, the United States has navigated a precarious balance between the competing interests of Ethiopia, Kenya, and the fragile federal government in Mogadishu. Vice President JD Vance's public confrontation with Representative Omar effectively signaled an end to the strategic ambiguity that had previously characterized the State Department's approach to East African influence. By exposing the degree to which a sitting member of Congress may have been coordinating with foreign officials to tilt American policy, the administration has ignited a firestorm in international relations. This is not merely a domestic scandal, but a fundamental recalibration of how America identifies its allies and adversaries in an increasingly multipolar world. In Addis Ababa and Nairobi, the reaction to the Omar collapse was met with a mixture of quiet relief and intense diplomatic calculation. For years, regional leaders have complained that certain voices in the American government were providing cover for aggressive Somali expansionism and maritime claims. The leaked audio provided the smoking gun that these leaders needed to prove that American policy was being manipulated from within for the benefit of a specific ethnic agenda. Conservative foreign policy analysts have quickly seized on this moment to advocate for a more transactional and realistic approach to the region. They argue that our commitment to any foreign entity must be predicated on a strict America First metric that prioritizes maritime security in the Red Sea over ideological solidarity. The subsequent federal investigations launched by the Department of Justice have opened a Pandora's box of questions regarding the vetting of legislative staff and foreign contributions. Reports suggest that investigators are looking into a web of non-profit organizations and cultural exchange programs that may have served as conduits for foreign political financing. This level of scrutiny is unprecedented in the modern era, and reflects a growing consensus that our democracy has become vulnerable to influence laundering. The Republican-led committees in the House are now drafting legislation that would require members of Congress to disclose all communications with foreign heads of state. This move is seen as a necessary safeguard to ensure that the People's House remains free from the corrupting touch of overseas interests. The implications for the 2028 presidential cycle are already becoming clear as both parties struggle to adapt to this new reality of loyalty-based politics. JD Vance has effectively positioned himself as the standard-bearer for a new kind of muscular nationalism that rejects the post-nationalist fantasies of the global elite. By successfully taking down one of the most visible figures of the radical left, he has proven that the culture war is not just about domestic values but about national survival. This has created a significant dilemma for the Democratic Party, which must now decide whether to purge its radical elements or risk further alienation from the American mainstream. The 2026 midterms have shown that the electorate is no longer willing to tolerate candidates who view their primary allegiance as a matter of personal choice rather than constitutional duty. As we look at the internal dynamics of Somalia, the fall of their most prominent advocate in Washington has led to a period of intense political soul-searching in Mogadishu. The federal government there had grown accustomed to a certain level of diplomatic protection that has now vanished overnight. Without the ability to influence American policy through the Squad and their allies, the Somali leadership must now face the reality of a much more skeptical and demanding Trump administration. This shift has already led to a decrease in unconditional foreign aid and a renewed focus on counterterrorism results over democratic platitudes. The message from Washington is clear. If you want American support, you must demonstrate a commitment to American interests, not just American tax dollars. The American public's perception of identity politics has undergone a radical transformation in the wake of this controversy. For a generation, the left argued that a representative's ethnic background was their most important qualification for office. However, the 2026 debate showed that when identity is used as a tool for foreign advocacy, it becomes a liability rather than an asset. Conservative commentators have been quick to point out that true diversity should strengthen the nation, not serve as a backdoor for foreign interference. This realization has sparked a national conversation about the need for a civic renaissance that emphasizes shared American values over hyphenated identities. It is a return to the melting pot ideal that many believed had been lost to the tides of postmodernism. Furthermore, the role of independent media and leak culture has been vindicated as a vital check on institutional power. The fact that the mainstream corporate press ignored the early warning signs of Omar's dual loyalty rhetoric, only to be bypassed by digital whistleblowers, is a significant turning point. It demonstrates that the gatekeepers of information can no longer protect their preferred political narratives from the scrutiny of the decentralized internet. The 2026 election cycle will be remembered as the moment when the unfiltered truth became more powerful than the most expensive political consulting firms. This democratization of information has empowered the American voter to look past the carefully curated public images of their leaders. The collapse of the Omar political machine has also had a profound effect on the NGO-industrial complex that often dictates the terms of international development. Many of these organizations, which have long been accused of being partisan actors in foreign conflicts, are now facing intense audit and oversight. Conservative lawmakers are questioning why American taxpayer money is being funneled through groups that appear to be working against our own strategic goals. This move toward greater transparency in foreign aid is a direct result of the clarity provided by the Vice President on that debate stage. It marks the beginning of a more rigorous and accountable era in American global engagement. As the legal proceedings against various actors involved in the Somali-American scandal continue, the nation is being forced to confront the limits of tolerance. We are learning that a free society cannot survive if its leaders are not fundamentally committed to its own preservation. The debate over loyalty is not an attack on any specific group, but a defense of the democratic process itself. If we allow our representatives to be bought or influenced by foreign powers, we have already lost our sovereignty. The 2026 turning point is a reminder that the price of liberty is eternal vigilance, especially against those who would undermine us from within. Looking ahead, the 2028 election will likely be a referendum on the very concept of the nation-state in a globalized world. JD Vance's success in 2026 has provided a blueprint for how to defeat the radical left by appealing to the common-sense patriotism of the American people. He has shown that when you force a choice between the world and the country, the American voter will choose the country every single time. This lesson will be at the heart of the next presidential campaign as the GOP seeks to build a lasting majority based on the principles of sovereignty, security, and solidarity. The morning in America that was promised decades ago may finally be arriving, but it is a morning that requires us to be awake and unashamed of our own national identity. The landscape of American civic life in 2030 will undoubtedly be traced back to the tremors of that fateful 2026 exchange. What began as a televised inquiry into one legislator's conduct has blossomed into a full-scale restoration of the American national character. The era of fractured identities and salad bowl multiculturalism, which dominated the early 21st century, is being replaced by a more robust and unified sense of belonging. Vice President JD Vance's refusal to accept anything less than total commitment to the flag has established a new baseline for public service. This cultural pivot suggests that the United States is no longer a collection of disjointed interests, but a cohesive nation once again. The unrivaled loyalty standard has become the litmus test for every aspiring leader across the political spectrum. As we look toward the next decade, the melting pot metaphor is being revitalized with a modern, unapologetic vigor. Conservative thinkers argue that for a diverse society to function, there must be a primary heat source, a shared love for the republic that melts away secondary grievances. The 2026 debate proved that without this unifying heat, the pot simply becomes a cold collection of competing tribalisms. By demanding that every citizen, especially those in high office, place America first, the nation is reinforcing its social foundations. This is not a rejection of heritage, but a clarification of priority, ensuring that our internal diversity remains a source of strength rather than a gateway for foreign subversion. The message to the world is that America is no longer an open platform for globalist experiments, but a sovereign home for its own people. The long-term impact on the Democratic Party has been a painful but necessary purge of its most radical, anti-nationalist elements. Following the defeat of the Squad and the subsequent investigations, the party has been forced to reconnect with the working-class voters it abandoned for the sake of identity politics. The 2030 political environment sees a more competitive, two-party system where both sides agree on the fundamental sanctity of the American border and the American oath. This new consensus has lowered the temperature of national discourse, as the debate has shifted from questioning the legitimacy of the country to debating how best to serve it. JD Vance's strategy of confrontational clarity has ironically led to a more stable and predictable domestic political environment. We are seeing a return to the era where political rivals can disagree on policy while remaining unshakably united in their devotion to the same constitutional vision. The federal judiciary and legislative branches have also undergone a period of reform aimed at insulating our government from foreign influence. New transparency and allegiance laws now require rigorous financial and diplomatic disclosures for all candidates seeking federal office. These measures, once criticized as intrusive, are now viewed as essential safeguards for a modern democracy in a multipolar world. The Omar precedent serves as a constant reminder that the trust of the electorate is a privilege that must be earned through transparency and maintained through consistent action. Investigations into foreign funding of domestic activism have dismantled many of the shadow networks that previously sought to manipulate American public opinion. Our institutions are now more resilient, more accountable, and more focused on the welfare of the American citizen than at any point in the last 50 years. In the realm of foreign policy, the Vance Doctrine has firmly established that American support is earned through mutual respect and shared strategic goals. No longer will the United States allow its diplomatic apparatus to be used as a proxy for the internal disputes of other nations. This clarity has actually led to greater regional stability in places like the Horn of Africa, as local powers can no longer rely on insider influence to tilt the scales in Washington. By prioritizing its own interests, the United States has paradoxically become a more reliable and honest broker on the world stage. Allies now understand exactly where we stand, and adversaries know that our internal unity is no longer a weakness to be exploited. The 2030 global order recognizes a United States that is inward-looking for its strength but outward-facing in its resolve. The demographic shifts within the Republican Party have also matured, creating a multi-ethnic coalition of patriots who view the American dream through a lens of duty. The Somali-American voter who challenged Omar in 2026 is now a symbol of a new generation of leaders who prioritize integration over isolation. This new American Guard is defined not by where their ancestors came from, but by their unwavering commitment to the future of the country they now call home. They are the strongest defenders of the border and the most vocal advocates for the American Constitution, having seen the alternative in the nations they or their parents left behind. Their presence in the GOP has effectively ended the left's monopoly on the immigrant narrative and replaced it with a story of successful assimilation. This shift has made the party more representative of the actual American experience than any academic theory of diversity ever could. Looking ahead to 2030, the image of an empty stage in a Minneapolis studio remains a powerful lesson in the consequences of political ambiguity. It stands as a monument to the moment when the American people reclaimed the right to demand loyalty from their leaders. The silence of one congresswoman was the catalyst for a national roar that redefined the parameters of acceptable political conduct. We have learned that our republic is not a passive entity but a living organism that requires active protection and unreserved devotion. The 2026 turning point saved us from a path of terminal fragmentation and set us on a course toward a more unified and confident future. The wounds of the past decade are beginning to heal, replaced by the scar tissue of a nation that has survived its greatest internal test. Ultimately, the story of 2026 is a story of national rebirth and the enduring power of the truth. It reminds us that no matter how complex the world becomes, the fundamental questions of identity and loyalty remain the bedrock of any successful society. JD Vance's role in this drama was that of a catalyst, but the true heroes were the voters who recognized that their country was worth defending. They chose the flag over the faction, the nation over the diaspora, and the future over the grievance. As we march toward the middle of the 21st century, we do so with a renewed sense of purpose and a clearer understanding of what it means to be an American. The era of doubt is over, and the era of the sovereign, unified republic has truly begun. The final legacy of this period will be a country that is once again comfortable in its own skin and unapologetic about its own values. We have moved past the need to appease global critics and have returned to the work of building a more perfect union for ourselves and our posterity. The 2026 debate was the fire that tested the mettle of our national soul, and we have emerged from it stronger, purer, and more resilient. As the sun rises on the America of 2030, it shines on a people who know who they are, where they belong, and what they are willing to stand for. The empty stage is no longer a sign of failure, but a symbol of the space we have cleared for a new, more honorable generation of leaders. The Republic stands, its heart is true, and its loyalty is no longer a question, but a foundational fact of life.